Joining us now is Emily Miller, a physical therapist at DMC Rehabilitation Institute of Michigan, where she's also certified in strength and conditioning. Emily played softball at Trenton High School and went on to coach JV softball for almost 10 years at Livonia Churchill High School. Emily, thank you for joining us on the Swing Away podcast today.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, so seeing that you played softball yourself, what position did you play while you were there?
I was probably a jack of all trades, master of none. I was a pitcher in high school, although this was so long ago we didn't have the pitching instruction like they did now. So I wasn't near as good as these young ladies are these days. But I also was able to. I played a lot of outfield and infield as well. When you make yourself a utility player, you can get on the field easier. So I always tell kids to learn how to play more than one position. So.
Right, and you're mentioning pitching, some of these positions can be very physically taxing. So when you're looking at softball players nowadays, what are some common injuries that you're noticing?
Well, from, more the acute injuries, so we can break it up into both acute and more overuse injuries. Acutely, you're going to see kids, sprained ankles, knee injuries. If they get clunked in the head, they get a concussion or something like that. And some, more acute trauma to the shoulder, poor mechanics of the throw or something. From a pitching standpoint, we oftentimes see these, what we call overuse injuries. So this is a chronic, the pain that's been building up over time that creates problems. And a lot of times, especially in the pitching, 8 out of the 9 positions in softball are all overhead athletes, but the pitcher throws differently and they throw a lot more frequently. So they're more prone to these overuse injuries. And you see a lot of common, like anterior shoulder, the front of the shoulder injuries with the biceps labral complex because of the amount of force in the windmill throw. So, but you can also see chronically, biceps tendonitis, things like that as well. So yeah, you break them down into two groups. Chronic, or acute and overuse. So.
And when you're looking at those two types of injuries, how can softball athletes reduce the risk of those?
I think from one of the easiest way is to make sure that you're warming up properly. Back in the day, it was run around the field 2 times and then stretch out your hamstrings and a few light stretches and start throwing. We kind of made the mistake, I think, in the past that throwing was a warm-up. In reality, we warm up before we throw. So a lot of times we're moving more towards what we call more dynamic or active stretching. So getting people to move before they actually go into their pitching drills, their throwing drills, their fielding drills, whatever it might be. So when we talk about active warm-up, so moving your active or dynamic warm-ups means warming up by moving. And so using, starting with your arms, doing shoulder circles, forward, back, swinging your arms across your body a little bit, up and down, swinging your legs, hip circles, things like that. And then you could progress to, more active stretching in the lower extremities. So it means like high knee marches or straight leg raise walking or toy soldiers. But you also want to move in all planes of motion. You just want to go forward and back. You want to move side to side, and you want to work some rotational things as well. So, lunge with twisting, lunge walking, karaoke where, you're doing like those grapevines, things like that. So getting people moving in multiple planes, but doing this all before you actually pick up a bat. So important there. With respect to some of the pitchers, one of the things, and for a long time, if you follow Little League baseball or any kind of baseball, they talk about pitch counts. But for a long time, we really didn't discuss that with softball pitchers at all. If you watch any of the Women's College World Series or some of these tournaments, these kids will play, how many games in a day, and some of these softball tournaments in high school, well, they're riding the same pitcher. And now we know a little bit more that they're trying to really look at pitch count and trying to limit pitches based on, how many they're throwing a day. And they kind of break them up in age groups. So the younger kids, they may limit it to 80 a day and then less the next day, but then do not pitch more than 2 days in a row. Whereas some of the older kids, you get in the teenage years, they can maybe pitch after 3 days, they need a day of rest. And when we mean rest, we mean no throwing, no batting practice throwing, you just take a day off. So I think when we're getting smarter with our treatment of these athletes, we're going to prevent injuries that way.
Yeah, and you were talking about it's very common amongst softball players to have the overusage, and it's important to incorporate that dynamic and active stretching. But when you're not on the field, what are some good conditioning programs that players should be a part of?
Well, hopefully some of these in these off-season training and stuff like that. I think one of the things that we tend to, when kids go to the gym and they tend to lift, and they want to lift and create nice shapely shoulders, work deltoids, work their lats, but where they really need to start working some of the smaller muscles in the smaller muscles of the rotator cuff, and some of the muscles that stabilize the shoulder blade, and work on mechanics that way. Also training the lower extremity, because at the end of the day, strong legs and proper using your hips and your lower extremity properly, that's where your throw develops. If you don't have strong legs and proper rotation through your trunk, you're going to have potentially some injuries as well. And sometimes when you look at whether it's baseball or softball, kids that are more arm throwers and they don't use their legs, those are the ones that are going to start to develop some of these overuse injuries, or potentially even a traumatic tear or something like that. So very important to incorporate both upper and lower extremity. A good strength and conditioning program will have these spelled out and working. So it's okay working squats and lunges and things like that as part of your routine. It's not just about the arm. It's definitely both upper and lower, and core strengthening, to make sure that you're integrating a good core program with planks and any kind of stability ball things. There's no one perfect exercise out there, but there's a lot of things that kids can do to try to work on core strengthening. But integrate movements too, like that actually kind of mimic what a softball player is going to do in a game, movement wise. So squats are great, but how do we use a squat, and how to, change a direction, things like that too. So working on agility.
Definitely is important to target your core and to incorporate your lower half. And one more question before we let you go here, Emily. Just as a former softball athlete, did that experience inspire you to become a physical therapist and an athletic trainer?
Partially, yeah. I always liked sports. I always knew I wanted to do something related to that, and then I did a little volunteer work in both a hospital-based setting, so that in a neuro rehab actually, and then I also did some volunteer work down at the University of Detroit in their training room for a little while to try to see both sides of it. I mean, physical therapy. There's so many different avenues you can go in physical therapy, and then as I went on, I got a strength and conditioning certification. There are so many great instructors that aren't physical therapists, but they really specialize in how the body moves. And so some of the ones that have inspired me are ones that are not necessarily physical therapists, but they have such a keen awareness of how the body moves and how to train the body. And again, less with machines and more with bands and balls, and looking how we move, and looking at how to train efficiently and properly for our athletes, and be more sport specific.
Right, understanding how the body moves certainly is quite key. Emily, thank you for your time today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much.
If you have a sports injury or want to maximize your athletic performance, contact the DMC Sports Medicine team at dmc.org/sports.